the very first moment that we consider that children are important stakeholders in transitional justice processes, they straightforward become an important outreach target group or audience.
I think the greatest challenge for the Commission was taking statements from children, because there are many steps that lead up to that process, and also many steps within that process itself.
One would have, thought these wounds are totally closed, and we do not need to reopen these wounds. We don't need to remind the children of the experiences that went through. But we found that with those wounds, they needed some cleaning.
Children's testimonies and recommendations will be included in the final report, as children spoke to various issues in our mandate. Therefore, their opinions will be as important as opinions of the adults around them in terms of the recommendations they gave to the Commission.
Outreach programs are fundamental in order to bridge the gap between between transitional justice measures and the communities and societies in which they operate, in terms of opening direct channels of communications between the institution and the society. And this is something that it's important in both directions, both like in terms of disseminating information in order to provide enough information to the population on what this whole exercise is about and what are the options they have for participating, and also in learning from the affected communities what their priorities, what their needs, expectations, etc. are. If transitional justice measures want to be participatory and inclusive, it is important that they differentiate between different groups that, because of different motives, have different needs and interests in the process. And these are specific kind of needs in terms of how they are going to be reached, but also in terms of the content of what it's going to be delivered to them, or what is the opportunities of participation that are going to be given to them.
People didn't know about the Truth Commission. There was the special court at the same time, so there's a lot of confusion. If we had had time to properly do media relations and outreach throughout the country, I think then you could have involved, sensitized parents maybe on how to involve children, the necessity to involve children, to give them a voice. So I think this first phase was an opportunity missed.
The children already had burdens. Nobody ever talked to them to understand what happened. Some of them even don't know why people are fighting. They were too small. They didn't understand why they were fighting. Some of them didn't know why they are staying in the camps. They didn't know why they have just left their house, now they're staying in the camp. Some of them, they had friends who are across communities. They didn't know what happened in the communities. So they were such in a confusion that they had for a long time, and nobody ever tried to explain anything to them.
And children, because of their age, there is a need first to put special measures in place, and especially to take a proactive approach in order to create spaces in which children are going to be able to participate in a safe manner, and something that needs to be planned.
In terms of reaching out to children, we thought it's best to leverage on groups and organizations and individuals that are already working with children. So we reached out to child protection agencies. We told them about the mandate of the Commission, and that we would want to involve children, and that we would require their support and their participation in involving children. From identifying children, to creating awareness about the Commission, and thereafter disseminating information about the report of the Commission and the findings of the Commission to children.
An outreach program, it's not that easy to go out there and find the groups you want to meet, and the school system does offer a very reliable and broad structure in which you can target kids, or you can meet with kids through schools in a classroom. Kids, they already know themselves, the teachers is there, and there's many programs that many transitional justice measures that have take advantage of the school system.
Resources that would have been useful would perhaps be information, education and communication materials specifically targeted at children, how to break down the mandate and the work of the Commission to a children's audience.
The specific considerations that should be dealt with in terms of child protection framework are put into place, and also in order to make the outreach activities educational, adapted to their needs in terms of cognitive development, and also entertaining.
First of all, to have just a normal workshop for them to enjoy, because they have never had such a workshop, just to sit with one another and talk. But we had standby counselors on board so that they can also to help out, then be able to start asking them how, if they were to be asked to retell what happened, what are some of the issues that they went through that time, how have they been handling the issues right now, and what will they want to see being addressed. What will they want this country to do to ensure that such a thing doesn't happen again?
So one of the things we've seen that works really well, it's when children talk to children. So actually not having the commission or the tribunal giving the message to children, but getting children involved in the whole process and develop their own messages. And something that has been, for example, very successful or very interesting is the radio Kids Talk to Kids programs in Sierra Leone, which are just programs that are done by kids. And it's not only that they frame it in their own language and in their own way of expressing things, but it's also something they take ownership of, because they are actually learning to do something, and they are taking ownership of the whole process, and this is also a learning experience. And it's also this way in which interaction is triggered in a more natural manner. It's also about having people that really know how to interact with kids, because this is not something that easy. You know, it's not that everybody can just get into a group of like 15 children and let them, you know, express themselves. That things doesn't happen, and there's a need to create trust and to build a space in which they feel confident and they can develop the means they want to express themselves.
In terms of the statement taking, we had a different statement taking process for children. There were different set of statement takers who were trained on or had experience on children's rights, working with children. So some were seconded to us by child protection agencies. We trained them on how to work with children, in terms of interviewing children and getting information from children.
We actually looked at the statement form, and we wanted first of all to be child friendly, because there are some questions which you can ask adults to think through and they can be able to answer. But we made sure that the questionnaire that they came up with was not very incriminating, and it was collecting information from children in a friendly way. Because an adult, you can be able to ask them questions. Did you see anybody being killed? Or was your father killed? Or, you know, that direct things. But for the children, when you do it, then you start raising their emotions again, you know. So that we ask them to make a questionnaire in a way that it will be more of like a discussion. So we actually encourage the TJRC just to have, first of all, to train the note takers, especially for children, on children's rights, and be able to understand how to deal with children, to relate with them, and then just make it to be more of a discussion.
Another avenue of obtaining information that a lot of people don't hit on, because we hinge so much importance on the spoken word, is that a lot of children find great self-expression through drawing or through singing. And it's a little unorthodox, but for a child who has experienced trauma, being able to draw it out and show you in vivid color, or in black and white, as the case may be, just with pencil on paper, is also quite powerful. Or even asking children to role play, sometimes is seen as a safer way of acting out. Can you show me with your friend, for example, what you saw? Can you show me by acting how that made you feel? So I think that there are other ways of questioning. There are a couple of basic tenets to interviewing children, especially, and children are not all, we don't treat them as a homogeneous group. I mean, there are different techniques for interviewing children under the age of 5, children who are adolescents, and children who have experienced trauma. I think in the context of this TJRC process, many young children were interviewed, but a lot of focus was paid on those children who lived through the post-election violence and saw the atrocities perpetrated during post-election violence. And a lot of those children now are in their teenage years or are young adults. And young adults a little bit more resilient.
They were also given a chance to share their expectations, what they expect of the TJRC. And apart from that, these children were made aware of the main reason why the statements were being taken from them. Most of the children suffered a great loss, material, emotionally, psychologically. Others lost their relatives. Others probably didn't even understand death. So most of them expected that after the process, probably you're going to bring their parents back or their lost ones back. Others who lost their properties felt that it was an opportunity for them to be given back what they had lost. Others were not even able to share the expectations because it is like they had lost hope. They didn't know what to expect anymore.
It's a delicate approach, especially for issues where they have witnessed violence or they themselves have been victims of violence upon their person, and of course emotional violence. You always want to make sure that there is some kind of a counsel in the room, a social worker in the room, that you've got parent and guardian approval for this particular interview to take place, because you're not quite sure what kind of Pandora's box of emotions it's going to open up, and they need to be in a safe place. The questions posed to a child, you'd like them to be as open-ended as possible. You want that child to tell you in their own words, not in your words. And that means also recognizing that the child may not be able to tell you in English what happened as accurately as they might be able to tell you in their own native language, which means that you have to have an interpreter on hand who understands the nuances of what's trying to be conveyed and convey it to you. And this, you walk a thin line. I mean, your first priority is to do no harm. And if you cannot talk to a child and have that child talk to you in a way that is safe for that child afterwards, emotionally or physically, there is an ethical question as to whether or not you should be even talking to the child. This is why the provision of psychosocial support, the presence of a parent, and the presence of a counselor is very, very important. I would question the integrity of anyone who sat down with a child without thinking through whether or not they were going to be able to support that child afterwards. I think in terms of best practice for this, the best practice is to make sure that there are the appropriate support systems available.
What we do, we bring children together, let them air their views, some of them air even through writing, as I said, through drawing, and then at the end of the day you tell them, these are the issues you've raised. Can you propose people to go and present their views for you? So actually the selection comes from the children themselves. We make it very participatory. We let the children themselves select their representatives. And their work doesn't end there. Their work ends when they go back and report what they have done.
We have an in-house counselor. And normally all cases that are reported to us, she arranges sessions with the children, and she's able to tell of the stages that they are in with the healing process, or rather the restoration. So she selected the children whom she thought will be best suitable to appear before the TJRC.
In terms of having the hearings for children, the legal department supported us so as to determine the confidentiality levels and privacy levels that should be afforded to the children. Therefore, though the hearings were in public in terms of they were not in camera, the identities of the children were not revealed, their names were not revealed, and we had support from the legal department in doing that. So members of the public who were in the hall where the hearings would be would hear the child speaking, but would not know who the child was and would not be able to identify the child.
The children, the ones who testified, were not seen by the public. So they were with the commissioners. Then there was a barrier. There was like a wall. And what the public was hearing was only the voice. And some of them requested not to really have an in-camera, that is, no voice projection, no seeing them, and we respected that.
The child was accompanied at the hearing by their parent or caregiver or person whom they trusted, and a counselor.
They have just talked, and this is the beginning of their healing. And we didn't want to assume that all is well. So one of the mechanisms that we had put in place is that we had a therapy room. So immediately after one testifies, and we ensured that someone sat on them, the same person who sat with them during the hearing goes to the therapy room with them and take as long as the child needs, so that those issues that came up are now dealt with in details. And then we also ensured that even after they have normalized and joined the rest of the children, we also ensured that we followed them, that we're checking that wherever they are safe. And then the rest of the days we stayed with the children, and because of the friendship that there was, it was easy for them to call you aside and request that you can, can you talk? And we also, even after that, we ensured that we kept on following them to ensure that they are safe.
The child also had opportunity to take breaks when they were speaking. They also had play and art material, particularly for the younger children, which they played with and interacted with even as they spoke to the commissioners. The commissioners did encourage them and did tell them that it is okay to cry, it is okay to break down, and we shall continue when they are ready. And so together with the counselors and the parent or guardian, the child felt encouraged and strong enough to continue their testimony.
We have social workers out there, and we do not allow the children just to go like that. Those, we're trying to connect them with the caregivers, the other people who can give them support. Because the minute we received them, we went as caregivers, also as counselors, and giving them psychosocial support. You realize that there are some that needed an ongoing help. And so we did not let them go like that. We ensured that someone, when they go back, they can get the help that they could.
I don't think that you should be asking children these types of questions that might lead to trauma if you cannot provide them the appropriate type of care immediately and or follow-up. And I think that should be a hard and fast rule.
We are obliged as a commission to come up with findings and recommendations, and our recommendations are mandatory, so they have to be implemented. So we're being very careful as a commission to ensure that the people that we have heard from, that the report is an accurate picture or report of what we have heard. I think we are now down to having a chapter specifically on the experiences of children, and coming up with findings and recommendations. So I think giving the children a chapter, we will ensure that what they said and what our recommendations will be clear.
If you want children to have access to what the Truth Commission has done and what the conclusions and recommendations are, you cannot rely on the final report of the Commission. And you can either use the report to develop training and class materials, or you can come to do what has been called, or what is known as a child-friendly version report. It is a report that it's about children and for children, first and foremost, and that means it's something that it's significant for them, that has meaning for them, and it is done thinking on them.
The purpose of a child-friendly guide should not be a march through an awful history where you read the story and what you learn is you come from an awful place with an awful history and you can't trust anyone. They need to know that there are people like the people at Childline who will answer their call or their text 24/7, who will get up and find a way to make a difference in their lives. Kids need to know that there are people who are fighting for democracy. They need to know that there are people who both they can strive to be, but there are people who they can count on. Because I think any TJRC report, any TRC report, or any child-friendly guide, or any kind of education that sends the message that you're out of luck, is a really bad message to send to kids.
In terms of the process on how to do a child-friendly version report, I mean, there's no blueprint because there has only been one done so far. But I mean, there's several things that are fundamental when thinking about doing a project of this sort. First is having the adequate experts doing that. This is not something that anybody can do, and just because you know about human rights or about children, it's a straightforward. I mean, this is something that requires a pedagogical and educational, very carefully thought approach.
Facing History has this pedagogical approach where we begin with issues of identity, and then we look at questions of membership and belonging. Then we look at history and human behavior. And the idea is we look at a historical event as if it's not inevitable, and we look at moments leading up to that event and the human behavior that animates it. So we look at obedience and conformity and questions of bystander behavior and upstander behavior, resistance, and so on. Then we look at issues of justice, judgment, legacy, memory, and then we look at participation. So we took that as a structure, and then we took the justice judgment piece and really built out within that where we'd put the TJRC itself and the report.
Equally important is to include children in this process. You need to hear them. You need to know how their voices are going to be incorporated in something that it's actually for them. I mean, and for that there's also many things you can do in terms of including their stories, including their letters, including their pictures. I mean, just have them completely involved in the process.
We also want it talked about with adults. The whole idea of bringing children into the fold. They're not just witnesses and they're not just victims. These are people that are going, I mean, they're children and they're going to grow up to be adults and they're going to grow up to be functioning members of society. And I think it's very important for adults and children to have a dialogue about what happened using language that is child-friendly. And so in addition to perhaps teaching children about what happened and how they can be more engaged and have a voice in their own society, it also gives them a document or something to hold on to when they talk to their parents about what happened and when they talk to their teachers about what happened. And you know, it's not just the parents and teachers. We're also talking about, in rights language, duty bearers. We want them to be able to talk to their representatives, their chiefs, their parliamentarians. And I would hope that the child-friendly version of the report will give them the type of language that they can use to convey their thoughts and their hopes and their dreams.
And I think that education provides a space, an institutional space, to not just reckon with the violent past, but to also develop the dispositions and the skills and the good stuff of civil society, to create spaces for practicing democracy.
There would be need to put in place right from the start mechanisms to reach out to the different groups that are targeted. So, for example, children, resources, civic education, and to start planning for their participation, because children's participation requires a lot of background work to ensure that it happens. And so there's need for commitment and goodwill, as well as deliberate plans to ensure that they do participate.
Very often you see documentation before you that talks about the importance of including children's views and about how we should be moving towards more participatory approaches to community development work and community behavior change. But very rarely do you ever see it translate to the scale of what they were able to accomplish in the TJRC with those children's forums and the children's hearings. We should see more of this type of engagement. And I think it's important to emphasize that this was not a top-down type of engagement either. This was a type of engagement that came through the process of listening to children speak in their respective villages and being with those communities. And these children said, yes, I will go to Nairobi and I will be part of a formal hearing process. And that's important also. Nobody told them you must. Nobody told them you can't. They were given the option to do so. And I think that's important. That's important.
Young people need to have access to the information that's taking place in their countries. So one part of it is that kids play a big role, either as actors or as victims. We know from TJRC testimony and what's taking place in Sierra Leone and other places, kids are most likely to be the ones who are left behind, the ones who are injured. They're incredibly vulnerable. And we also know that kids are affected not just in the immediate context, but also in the long term because of their memories, the traumatic experiences that they suffered. So all of these things have an impact on them, and they too need to understand what they experienced, not just as an individual personal experience, but as an experience that's tied to something that they need to understand wasn't just this aberrant, violent explosion that was inevitable, but actually something that could have been prevented. What we're trying to do is give them inspiration and a foundation for a better life.